Hi, this is Paul. One of the things I've been doing more is reading Substack, and eventually I found Matt Whitley. I don't know who Matt Whitley is. If Matt Whitley finds this video, get in touch with me. My email address is pretty easy to guess from my channel name. And yeah, we'll probably have to wait till later in the summer, but I'd love to hear your story. He's been in many ways following many of the similar things that many of us are following. You'll find Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke, Alex O'Connor, mostly from a religious point of view. He wrote sort of, as he said, an emergency post after Jordan's appearance on Jubilee, but I thought the piece that he wrote today was probably one of the pieces that I appreciated most in terms of some of his commentary on some of the stuff that we cover. And I really, part of what caught me right away was the title, Why Can't We Look Away? Because it is just so fascinating how much attention Jordan generates and emotion and why. Some of you will remember the Sorting Myself Out channel. That was an early channel in the Jordan Peterson sphere where a guy decided he was going to take Jordan Peterson's teaching and apply them to himself, and he was going to stop smoking weed, and he was going to marry his girlfriend, and he was going to get a job, and he was going to yada yada yada. And he did that for a while, and he ran that shtick, and he ran the channel up pretty high. And then there was a whole bunch of drama because apparently he wasn't actually following through with everything that he was doing. There was a degree of prolificity with respect to his performance, and so that guy sold the channel to a couple other guys. And this is part of how back 6 years ago I had a conversation with
Thank you so much for
Ryan and Mercury. Yeah, that's me back in the day, and. So, and this is actually the manner by which Grim Grizz sort of came into the channel through the second iteration downstream of the Sorting Yourself Out channel, Myself Out channel, and just recently it came back alive again, and Mercury was streaming after a long hiatus, and he had done a live stream, and at the end of the live stream we were talking, and he said he was going to cut out the end of the live stream, but he was talking to me about his early impressions of Jordan. And I thought he so beautifully sort of distilled what things were like in those very early days of C16, 2016, 2017, 2018, really before Jordan disappears in 2019 and doesn't really reappear a bit after that.
I didn't want to. I still love Jordan Peterson. Absolutely nothing that I said about him previously is no longer true. However, the direction he has gone is something I do not want to be associated with. And no, I'm not saying you would judge me for being critical. I judged me for being critical. I didn't want to. But because I was so strongly associated with Peterson, I did want to get that out there, that he's moved in directions that I just don't want to be associated with. So I still love his old stuff. And in fact, the reason I find it so disappointing, the changes he's made I disagree with. The reason I find them so disappointing is precisely because he had something that was so precious at the beginning. Jordan Peterson reached desperately suicidal people of all political persuasions in a way that I've never seen anyone do. Even though initially he was divisive and initially he was speaking out against the far left, initially he was doing it in such a good way that far left people were taking advantage of his material and pulling themselves out of suicidal states. I've spoken to them. He was reaching far left people. And he was reaching just people desperate about to commit suicide. He was even reaching school shooters that were planning on shooting up schools. He could reach those kind of people. He could reach them on the left and the right. His newer material, which I find more divisive, like his comment that girl isn't beautiful, And then he does a podcast with Michaela discussing his reasons for it. And the end of it, he says, so you know what? If you don't like it, fuck you. I can't believe he did that. It's like, really? Anyone who didn't like that you called her not beautiful, you want to say fuck you to them all now? And so we don't want to help any of those people. And like, by the way, I didn't like that. I thought she was beautiful. I didn't like that you said it. And also, with a lot of Peterson's material, I just don't like how angry he's gotten. I don't like that he chose a side, and I'm not saying he chose the wrong side. I don't judge left or right as wrong. Initially, Peterson was not choosing a side and was saying he was metapolitical. This is something I liked it when he wasn't choosing a side because he was reaching both sides. Then he chose a side, and then he got more divisive, more angry, and more offensive. That really disappoints me, only because that alienates people he used to reach. And that was such a precious service he provided that I don't see anyone else filling that niche. Does anyone else see someone else filling the niche of early Peterson, of reaching the desperately suicidal, reaching far left people and school shooters and pulling them out of the darkness?
So I thought that was a really fine articulation, and you know, just the way he said it. You know, I thought it really captured that moment. Because I've been sort of researching this on YouTube, Algo's been serving up to me some videos that I've never seen before, and some of them a few years old. A channel I didn't know about, probably some of you know about it, the P.F. Jung channel. He had a video 2 years ago with 2,600 views that I thought, it's pretty good.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Obviously, Jordan Peterson remains for me based and a societally necessary figure in the public arena. And the purpose of this video is to illustrate and exemplify one of the core ideas he lays out in his philosophical work in Maps of Meaning. So this will be much more than just commentary about his antics on Twitter, which, to be honest, I've done before and isn't that interesting, but is relevant, unfortunately, in the current context. This video is about the role that younger generations have in carrying forward and embodying the ideas that they inherit from their teachers, their elders, or their culture. The whole memeified Jordan Peterson idea of rescuing your father from the belly of the whale is exactly that. So consider the following excerpt from a classic Peterson lecture about this idea and see if the clips that I mix into it fall in line with what he's saying.
So anyways, Geppetto is feeling pretty hopeless because he can't figure out any way of getting out of the whale, and he's also starving. He's starving in the belly of the whale. Here's a way of thinking about that. Geppetto's a good guy, but he's old. And that means his way of doing things is no longer fruitful. That's why he's starving.
Twitter's a rat hole in the final analysis, and I have probably contributed to that. No doubt, I owe some apologies for that, and I'm trying to learn.
And it's especially not fruitful because he's missing his son. He's missing the active element that the child represents, say the playful and transformative element that the child represents.
I'm not very agreeable.
Right. I've noticed that actually in this conversation.
At least
and I'm sure it served your career well.
What rules, you sons of bitches? Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
And so if you get stuck doing something the same old way, at some point it's no longer going to work, even if it was good at some point.
So let's dig in a bit more here and see if I'm actually wrong about any of this. Let's do a Petersonian analysis. Who is Jordan Peterson? He is a university professor, so he's a teacher, an educator, a steward of the cultural traditions of which our entire society is nested in and depends upon. And it's pretty clear, to me at least, that he genuinely wants the best for people, and I'm confident that if more people in power were like Jordan Peterson, society would be way better off. So because of all this, he is someone who very easily constellates the archetype of the wise old man. You know, the Gandalf figure, the Dumbledore figure, Ned Stark, Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's very easy to project onto him the positive aspect of culture. And that's why he, in many ways, is like Geppetto.
and he's good at making things, and he's got a sense of humor, and he's kind of playful, and so he's the good father, fundamentally. He's the wise king. He's the positive archetype of the masculine. And that's what he is, and so he's culture in its positive manifestation.
But as you may know, the problem with culture is that it also has a negative side, and that negative side manifests itself when the culture becomes corrupt and stagnant and outdated. When some of the wisdom of the past no longer maps onto the present environment, because the present environment has transformed so dramatically from the previous past environment of which that acquired wisdom was applicable to. This is what Peterson talks about in the story of Osiris, and this is also what Brett Weinstein points out from an evolutionary perspective.
Here's how the story goes. Osiris is a great king. He established the Egyptian state. You could think about him as the embodiment of Egyptian custom and tradition, all right? But he was great when he was young, but he's not young anymore. He's old, and he's willfully blind. And what that means is that he doesn't see what he could see. He refuses to see what he could see. Why is Osiris old and willfully blind? Because that's what culture is. It's a paternal spirit that's old and willfully blind, and it's always that way.
But you have a parallel problem. It looks to me like the exact mirror image, which is that you've got an integrative, long-term measure of well-being instantiated in an evolutionary belief system, but it's coming apart because we are living in circumstances that are less well mirrored. The present does not mirror the past, and therefore these truths, which you believe are timeless, are degrading rapidly.
That's part of that's exactly right, yes.
Okay, so what Sam is arguing is that the tools to pivot in order to improve our way of interacting, those are not the tools of long-standing tradition. Those are the tools of rational engagement.
Respect for that process is part of the long-standing tradition.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, but that's a big truth, man.
I agree.
That's a major league truth.
I
and
agree.
in fact, I would say the fundamental tradition, the most fundamental tradition of the West, says that respect for the process that updates moral judgment is the highest of all possible values.
Respect for the process of updating moral judgments is of the highest possible values. In other words, there is great value and necessity of constructively criticizing your own culture when it begins to decay. And that's what it means to rescue the father from the belly of the whale, to separate the wheat from the chaff, to separate...
Okay, I'll put the link to this video below. It's not a very long video. I thought it was an excellent video. I could easily play the whole thing, but it's not really nice to play his whole thing. But it's a 2-year-old video. And actually, he just, because of, the entire Jordan Peterson thing has just sort of reinstantiated itself. He's got a new video with 22,000
Jordan
views.
Peterson has...
where he covers a lot of the same thing, goes over it a little bit more. What he has to say about it's also good, and I'll put the link to that. Well, I'll put the link to his channel, and then if I remember the second video below, and if I don't, just leave a comment in the comment section. I'll drop it in. They were both excellent. Now, last Friday, it's usually my practice on Friday to make a video for Monday. I made a video for Monday where I walked through some of these things, and I played some of the old videos. But there are some reasons why sometimes if I make a video and I'm just kind of feeling like, I don't know, I put it in no wait, no ads, and then I thought, well, I'll just give it to the members. I'll give it to all the members, so I just put it out to the Randos section of the membership, so a membership at any level can watch it. So I put that video out on Friday, and I mentioned this video by Gospel Simplicity, which I thought was an excellent video. With all of these questions, you always have to ask the question, where are you standing in order to give this judgment? And so what I liked about the P.F. Jung videos was that he really tried to take a look at Jordan from within some of Jordan Peterson Wave 1, what I call Wave 1, 2016 to June 2019. That's sort of Wave 1. And so he critiques Wave 2 Jordan, or at least Wave 3 if we call Daily Wire, the big transition. Daily Wire Jordan from the other Jordan, and he gets into the anger. What Austin does here, I think, tremendously, again, it's not a very long video, and I'll put the link below to it, is from if you look at 20th, 21st century theology and you map it, where does Jordan Peterson fit? Now, what he says quite nicely is that Jordan's an interesting cat in this way, because on one hand, if you listen to him carefully and you basically understand theological mapping, he's in many ways sort of a modernist in terms of his theology. Now, I'm not going to explain that. I think he does a good job in the video explain it. There's a lot more I could say about it, because I actually think the way he did this was part of the reason why at that moment in wave one, he felt like he was re-enchanting the Bible. And now when he treats the Bible often, it feels like he's disenchanting the Bible. And both of that that reason has to do a lot with where he stands with respect to a lot of the biblical material, the biblical criticism that is done over the last 200 years with respect to modernity. Maybe I'll play a little bit.
But is that really all it means to be Christian? I mean, if we stripped Peterson of his conservative popularity points, he would seem once again to be on the wrong side of the fence of orthodoxy by any normal theologically conservative viewpoint. And to this point, I don't think Peterson particularly cares. Many of the guests pointed out that the things he was saying seemed to be rather different than what a typical or normal Christian would believe, and he kind of just brushed this off. And he, of course, has no obligation to represent any one Christian viewpoint, as he himself...
Now, most of the people in a show like the Jubilee show, their vision of a Christian, they're generally going to be either practicing Roman Catholics, not nominal Catholics, and evangelicals, not people who go to the mainline church. And it's going to be shaped by all of the sort of culture war framing that has gone on for the last 30 years in the media. An evangelical has basically been framed by the media to mean a politically conservative Christian who also maintains supernatural beliefs. That's what the framing is. And so then Jordan just doesn't fit that. But I think, this, when you look at Jordan compared to that mapping, it's basically a modernist framing.
Himself doesn't seem to call himself a Christian, but I think Christians should take this reticence of his more seriously before propping him up as any type of Christian hero. Peterson's fourth and final claim, that atheists accept Christian morality, is where his project hits the biggest obstacle, at least in my view.
Okay. So again, the link to this is below. As I mentioned, I really liked this piece. And even this, why can't we look away? Which I think is in of itself a really important question. And the subtitle I thought was equally good. Why is the internet and me still so interested in Jordan Peterson? Because we need mad intellectuals like he used to be. And I like the P.F. Jung framing that, and the Mercury framing that in wave one, he was doing something that was so unique and so important. But again, that was also because of the context. And part of what we've seen is that the world has changed so fast, and he has changed to a degree. In that little video, I'm going to wind up. This is what happens when I make a video. I'm going to wind up remaking the video that I made. This is one of the early videos, and I'm just going to make the same points I made in that other video. There are some other reasons why. Anyway, so this is one of the early videos, and this is what I think grabbed people across the board of a certain framing to look at Jordan Peterson and say, wow. But again, notice he's in a very different context here. Jordan Peterson could not live like that anymore today. Why? He needs bodyguards. You think, oh, that's such a, it's not, he doesn't need bodyguards because he's rich. He needs bodyguards because the guy's a walking lightning rod. And I have other stories from people who have been in places with him, which is, if I would tell you the story, but they're not my story to tell, which demonstrates that he in fact does need bodyguards, because there are enough people out there that would do him physically harm if they got the chance, and he's high enough profile so that there are enough unstable people out there that would do him harm. So he couldn't just hang out among university students anymore. But so that's one aspect. He was, again, as I've mentioned many, many times, it is grossly unfair what has been done to Jordan Peterson in terms of he lost his university position. I mean, his life was wrecked by the internet. It was. Now, he's at a place where he's made a lot of money because of his best-selling books and because of his tours and because of all those things. Great. He has access to a whole new range of people that he didn't have before. Wonderful. But he's lost so much. Fame is a very tricky and brutal spirit, and most of us do not want to really get captured by that spirit. But I want you to just watch him. Now, he's engaging with someone that is just as much a jerk as, and just as, well, this person didn't have all the perverse incentives on the Jubilee, but this person is just going to be a jerk to Jordan, and he gets frustrated and all that, but just watch how he handles this. And this is a lot of what so much of us saw in the Kathy Newman video, in these early videos. He just had a way of dealing with this.
Disavow 150 videos on YouTube.
No, your lectures, which sparked the debate.
Okay. I have 150. Could you let me talk to her for a moment?
Don't call me that, please.
So, I have 100.
Okay, now notice, he does raise his voice. He is frustrated. Some anger comes through, but it's so much softer. It doesn't have the... And it doesn't have the... It's a pleading. It's less a scolding. And what the pleading, the softer pleading does is helps highlight how the person is engaging with him rather than how he's engaging with the other person. Now, so if you go to some of the other Jubilee videos and you look at the surrounded thing and you look at Charlie Kirk, the whole shtick there is never let them see you sweat. Always be happy. Never lose your temper. You can plead, but you don't want to scold. And it's a real delicate balance to walk. And he walks it here.
150 lectures on YouTube. There's 500 hours of my views.
Do you really think that you're worth all of that time?
So look, I will answer your question, okay? I've studied Nazism for a very long time. It's been 4 decades, and I understand it very well. And I can tell you that there's some awful people lurking in the corners, and they're ready to come out. And if the radical left keeps pushing the way
that sounds very much like a
they're
threat.
Going to come.
That sounds very much like a threat.
Right.
That sounds very much like a threat. Would you like to disavow the physical violence? Trans people were physically assaulted at this rally in your name. Would you like to disavow that violence?
Yes.
So you wish that didn't happen, and you want to, and I'm going to post this online that you would like people to not to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I would like there to be no violence.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating. I felt like my voice.
And so here, of course, he's got some allies with him, but he, she's asking a gotcha question. She's framing it in a way, but he quickly pivots. Very calmly, gets to the heart of the matter. I would like there to be no violence. That's it. Softly, calmly. I mean, it's just, this is what we saw. Now, again, I'm not saying you should be that again. Maybe he can't be that again. The context is completely different. He's not a university professor. He's not doing what he had before. And so, you're gonna have to pivot and figure out how you can be helpful.
Thank you very much. I'm also a former Muslim, and I feel like this guy is the best.
You wanted to disavow, and this is the disavowal. I am not an advocate of violence. I'm speaking out the way I'm speaking out because I think this is a route to no violence. And violence is lurking, and you can say that sounds like a threat.
There was no violence at our protest, though. There was violence at your protest. So what does that say about our views?
It's not my protest. Asking me continually freighted questions isn't very helpful. You actually want to have a dialogue. You have no idea if I'm your enemy. You have no idea about me.
You won't use my pronouns, so I'm pretty sure you're my enemy, yes.
Yeah, well, I know you think that, but I don't believe that using your pronouns is going to do you any good in the long run. I think it'll do quite the contrary.
What the fuck? Is that your medical opinion? What?
And again, he's not scolding. You can hear the softness. You can hear the care. She's not accepting any of it. I don't know what I don't know what her preferred pronoun is. But he's, again, it's good. It's really good.
Is that your medical opinion? Like, you are aware that non-binary people are valid in the American Psychological Association.
Is that your opinion?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
It's about non-binary pronouns.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
I'm saying that's
what I'm about.
Did you come to the rally? Were you there when I spoke?
I've been here for this whole thing.
Okay, well, I don't know that. It's a genuine question. Look, I think that's what's happening is that we're pushing over a line we shouldn't cross. The newest legislation is requiring people to use.
But you are aware that that's being put in place so that we can't get fired. We need to be written into the Canada human rights legislation, or we can be fired for our gender identity.
I'm not aware of that.
Well, then why'd you make a fucking video about it? I've been denied housing as a trans person. These rights would protect me.
Denied housing?
I've been denied.
And you saw that. I mean, just emotionally, you're in this, and then you just sort of hit a circuit breaker. But notice what he did. He just turned away, collected himself, and now he's going to re-engage. I mean, and part of this too is, you know, in the pastoral world we call this formation, and what we mean is that you are formed by your rituals. You are formed by what you do every day. And when I say rituals, I don't just mean what happens in a church service liturgically. That includes that. You are formed by the rhythms of your life. And so every day he's in this context. Every day he's talking to students that disagree with him. Every day, but he's also a clinician. And if you've ever sat with a therapist and watched a really good therapist do their job, it's super complex, especially if you're working with someone who's angry, who's hurting. And, you know, the therapist really has to be in control of themselves because things are going back and forth, even below the waterline. And, you know,
housing from the state or for the open market. So have you been denied housing, like, from the government?
It's illegal either way if we had human rights.
From the government?
Or
have you tried to get a house?
What would we gain? What would we gain from that?
There's a conspiracy of intent.
I didn't say it was a conspiracy.
There's another video too where it's at the it's not McMaster, that's a Masters in Southern California. It's at another Canadian university, and I mean they're just being awful to him. He's keeping his cool, he's keeping his calm, he's speaking to them in such a way. And again, what Mercury said, I thought, yeah, that was what made that moment special. But now again, that moment's gone, and the field has changed. He has changed. His life has changed. And the question isn't, you know, the question is for all of us, because the world does change around us. My life has changed because of this, since this. Okay, how do I pivot? What works best now according to the goals I want to make? What settings will work best, what won't. So back to the article. Why? Why should we care? Why should any of us care anymore? Peterson's zenith was arguably now nearly a decade ago. Not quite that long. I think his zenith was 2018, Kathy Newman. As you could tell, as Tammy was ill and he was under more and more pressure. But even then, before his absence, he was softer. You know, the weeping, and I have no problem. You can go back in my YouTubes and find me weeping over things. I think that just shows an engaged, soft, loving heart. But you could tell that he was having more and more difficulty with emotional regulation, even after he came back. That early video with John Vervaeke, which was just a wild ride, struggling with emotional regulation. The woman that gave me the Leonardo idea, that is in the membership video. She also said, you know, could be also that some of the anger is from his diet. Could be. I don't know. It's an unusual diet. It's an extreme diet. How does that impact? Now, clearly for him and Tammy and Michaela, that diet is giving them far greater life opportunities than they were having with a more conventional diet. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't know a better diet for them, and there might not be a better diet for them, but given the constraints that they have in terms of their allergies and their individual bodies, every diet is going to have certain limitations to it. So maybe that's a piece of it. I don't know. Most people have figured out that not a lot lies behind his insinuation of profundity when he says things like, it depends on what you mean by God. Besides some quasi-philosophical pragmatic light, there really isn't much, it seems, he does believe in. I think that's wrong. And some of the other pieces that he's written about Jonathan and John that I've read. You know, there've been things like that, which I think it's too dismissive. Jordan is trying to make a really important point about that. But I actually think the P.F. Jung videos go into that quite well, that this is actually a really important point. But that really important point requires a different setting to have that point properly engaged. I opened up YouTube, you know, how many times a day, and I saw Coleman Hughes, a new channel or a new video, and what's he doing? He's having interesting conversations with people. It's like the Joe Roganification of YouTube. And you might say, well, PVK, what's with you? You do that all the time. I do. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it seems in the attention economy, that's sort of like, well, this is what we're going to do. Well, part of it is because conversations are interesting. It's good to do it. But again, especially since sort of the Daily Wire thing, so he's just going to talk to people. And he likes talking to people. I get that. But part of the reason my channel is shaped the way it is, I compare, let's say, my channel to, say, Chris Williamson's project. Chris Williamson has become it's really sort of the Sorting Myself Out channel in a bigger way, more successfully, that he talks to people, and you sort of climb the status hierarchy. You get the biggest name you can, you go up a rung, you go up a rung, you go up a rung. And I don't go after names, generally. I've made a few exceptions, but the times I've made the exceptions have sort of, for me, validated my decision to not do it. Not that I didn't have lovely conversations with some people who have semi-big names, but because what I'd actually like, to the degree that I can more so, is to use the conversation to invite people into a bigger relationship. Now, it can't always be a relationship with me, because you've got the one and the many problem with respect to pastors, and YouTube, of course, blows that scale all the way up. But part of what I care about when I talk about this little corner, which is sort of this online community, and I just noticed that Ups had Greg back on with Afriel Pilotson in his little 30-minute shtick. Yeah, I watched it, Ups. I did. I didn't watch it all the way through. I plan on watching it all through because I'm really curious what you do with it. But I far prefer to use a conversation to bring someone into a larger conversation and community. Just having a one-off conversation with a high-status person will certainly get me far more clicks than talking with a rando. And yeah, I hear you, Phlebas. I don't do as many randos conversations. But part of that is why I do the Friday thing the way I do, because I want it less focused on me, and I want it more integrated into the community. And if I'm doing 3, 4, 5 rando conversations a week, the truth is the community can't really absorb that many people. So I'm perfectly happy to have Sam talk to Ross Douthat, and Sam has been going out and getting bigger names, and Jacob does that to a degree too. I'm perfectly happy with that, but I'd far rather develop a relationship. Now, you know, early on, just by virtue of the way it worked out, I developed, you know, a relationship with Jonathan and with John Vervaeke, and we've done in-person events together, and Lord willing, we'll continue to do those kinds of in-person events together. What makes that increasingly difficult, though, is the fact that both of them are getting more and more popular. They're online. They're getting more and more famous to a degree. And when we do a conference, that's felt. Now we have Northwestuary or Midwestuary that's coming up in August. And there's a link below in the notes if you want to go there. And Jonathan will be there, and John will be there, and Rodrigo will be there, and Elizabeth Oldfield will be there, and Cale Zeldin will be there. So we're going to have a great time. But again, that is much more in terms of what I'd like to do, which is, to the degree that we can, let's knit a community together of people who really know each other fairly well. And know each other. In the Vervaeke, Peugeot, Sam Tiedemann conversation on Transfigured, John Vervaeke made a hugely important point. They were talking about AI. It's about, 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way into the video. And what John Vervaeke noted is that we have, as human beings, this multimodal capacity that when something happens, we not only remember sort of the mapping of how it happens philosophically or narratively, but we remember the smell, we remember the broader environment, and all of these weird associations get built into us as human beings. And sometimes that can be a real problem because, let's say, if you experience trauma, in a specific classroom that had a specific smell, all that would take to sort of trigger that trauma would be that smell. But that illustrates the fact that when we're together in real life, there's so much more, and all of that contextuality actually builds in and makes the ideas. It shows that when we just have the ideas on, let's say, a map, they're flat. And that's why it's contextual, and that texture is so important. So, okay, I'll continue. I suppose, and we don't know a lot about Matt Whitley. I don't even know if that's his real name. He doesn't put his picture on it, so hey, fair enough. But again, because you're playing in this space, if you want to sort of come into the corner and play in this realm, although, since reading Substacks more, I have a better sort of feel for the weirdness of video versus, let's say, the essay of text. And both have their place. And, I was really sort of probing Martin Shaw about that in my last conversation with him because I want to understand that better. I was in my late 20s when he rose to success, and I was probably in the category of young men he believed himself to be speaking to. I was certainly not someone who would say he saved me from the dragon of chaos that was my untidy room, nor was I ever impressed with his ridiculous theories about, see again, this is something, so Matt, here's my critique of you. There's a lot of dismissiveness in here. So, and yeah, go back through my almost 4,000 videos. You'll find me being plenty snarky. I get it. But for people like Mercury, who I just played, those illustrations, any pastor will tell you. The points of my sermons, probably most people aren't going to remember. The illustrations of my sermons, that's what people remember. So the lobster isn't silly. The lobster is important, an important rhetorical illustration that grabbed and became mimetic. I've written before about his biblical series, all of which I've listened to several times. While they are frustrating, mad, and sprinkled with unfalsifiable gibberish and self-help gospel, they are tantalizingly interesting. Anyone who listens to them listens to Peterson changing his religious conversation, changing the religious conversation in real time. And that is exactly right. And now, at this point, he sort of mentions David Bentley Hart at changes. When Peterson started doing his Genesis series, the state of play for many people who sort of were locked in a prison of nihilism was a dismissiveness towards the Bible, that this is just, it was the critique of the new atheists sort of had its way with them. And that meaning crisis, that nihilism, and again, just go back in my conversations playlist. Conversation after conversation after conversation that follow this pattern where people were trapped in a meaningless world. And you can look at John Vervaeke's work on the meaning crisis. There are real reasons for this. And basically the world was mapped territory according to the new atheist. There was certain determinism that was at play. You can read C.S. Lewis's Miracles. It was the whole show. And the Bible was just a load of BS. But what Jordan did with the Bible was say, hey, wait a minute, no. There are actually patterns, and this is where he connects with Peugeot. There are actually patterns. The Bible isn't just debunked because it's bad history or bad morality or bad whatever the new atheists are saying. The Bible is actually mythological, and that mythology continues to be useful for learning and development because you can begin to see patterns in the world. And what Jordan and Jonathan did was, and John Vervaeke offered a lot of language, helped people see patterns in the world, and suddenly the world becomes alive to them again, because now they're seeing patterns, and seeing those patterns is helping them navigate, and they can mine for their own patterns, and they can see more, and on it goes. So this is a process of, it's not use, enchantment, reenchantment. There's a lot of issues with that. Let's say it's enlivening. Suddenly the Bible becomes alive, and the world becomes alive, and the Bible then helps people get it alive, and then people then discover, let's say, the divine liturgy and ancient liturgy, and so now suddenly everything is alive, and they are living in a much more transjective, to use another Vervaeke word, living transjective world, and it's completely helping. And again, for many people, some of the first liturgical religious steps they did was cleaning their room. And I talked to a lot of young men in that period, and some of them in Sacramento, and they like the Sorting Myself Out channel, they were working hard to do it because they knew they were not in a good place and they were not going anywhere. And what Mercury said was right. Even though the times are changed, and the truth is that anytime you sort of have a breakthrough, there's going to be a remapping of a territory, and so there's going to have to somehow be a fresh enlivening to have it happen again. And so Mercury's plea, I think, is a good one. And I think Mercury and many others, I saw a lot of people who were really excited about Jordan from 2017 and then early 2018, but then the more political it got, the more the attacks came from the left, the more framing from the left, the more Jordan moved to the right. And then when he went to Daily Wire, then many of Jordan's apologists on the left, when he moved to the Daily Wire, just sort of had to give up because it was like, you're in Ben Shapiro's camp? And fair or unfair, I don't know. I don't watch anything else on Daily Wire besides Jordan Peterson, except for Klavan. I like Klavan, and I really like his son. But as Mercury said, it all sort of just went away. And there's a lot of guys out there who are within the post-war consensus. I just started reading Strong Gods, R.R. Reno, Rusty Reno's book, and I think it's a super helpful thing. But there's a lot of people that are just simply, in the same way that Tom Holland's thesis that says we are just immersed in the cultural impact and influence of Christianity in the West. Many of those people are just immersed in the post-war consensus. And it's going to be so much of their framing that, Jordan Peterson was exercising a lot of people in that period. But when things turned and really turned much more political and angry, and again, Greg Hurwitz, there's a video where Greg and Jonathan are addressing the tweets. That one P.F. Jung video was addressing that moment in time, the tweet stuff. Now, if you go to Jordan on Twitter, he's not using Twitter in the same way. Why? I have no idea. We all have seasons in life and we do things differently. But so then he looks at David Bentley Hart's criticism, and then Whitley says, first, I don't think that's a fair criticism. Yes, Peterson has certainly always had a skim reading understanding of a lot of thinkers. Hey, me too. Now it's an AI. It's a quick AI search version of a lot of thinkers, which is probably a little bit of an upgrade, depending on the AI. And tended to engage quite sweepingly with strawman or cliches, something that has gotten worse with time, again. And he certainly leans towards the mad, but he was still reasonably well-read, and perhaps more obviously, he was exactly what he was, an eccentric Canadian psychology professor. If you expected that, you got it. It was interesting and infuriating in due measure, but if you expected a savior of religious learning who could supply a robust, pragmatic resurrection of the biblical tradition, not so much. And yeah, I think that's fair. I'm really hoping that they release the gospel seminar out to open YouTube. But even if you look at what happened in the Exodus seminar, which I enjoyed, and I also enjoyed the gospel seminar, and I think, again, for Jordan, you can sort of get at his professorial skills in a seminar atmosphere like that, and he had a lot of good people around him. But even with the Exodus seminar, for people who had sort of dismissed the Bible, and for people, let's say, who had just had their biblical world was pretty much mapped, and sort of the Jungian, symbolic, all the stuff that Peugeot was bringing in, that was all then fresh and enlivening. It was enlivening. But then when you see what happened with Exodus, Jordan sort of took it in reverse. And that's where I say it sort of has a modernist frame. Well, the story about Exodus is about tyranny. And it's like, yeah, it is about tyranny. And then sort of he has a civilizational application with respect to tyranny, a civilizational political application with respect to tyranny. Okay, fair enough. And a lot of those points I think are very valid. But when he sort of turns and makes those turns now, they're no longer enlivening, partly because many of the discoveries he made were exactly the kind of discoveries you'd expect to find popular on the Daily Wire. And so, okay. So you see part of, again, there's a lot, right away when he went to Daily Wire, there was a lot of criticism, and there still remains a ton of criticism where they went to Daily Wire. Now, why he did that, that's his own. You should remember that when he did it, too, he was just coming off his his illness. His wife was freshly healed. There was a lot of, that was, of course, before Elon Musk takes over Twitter. That was before all the Trump stuff. There was real question as to whether, Brett Weinstein gets demonetized on YouTube. And Jordan quite rightly was thinking YouTube might yank everything off. I want another video platform. And Daily Wire would always send out a team, and basically whatever Jordan wanted, Jordan got. And Daily Wire, more recently, I don't know the current status, has had some financial troubles. Don't know what's going on there. That might impact whether or not he's able to do a Revelation series. But the Daily Wire did change things, because before the Daily Wire, he was sort of being framed in that way. And when he took the Daily Wire, it's almost as if he embraced the frame. Secondly, the fact that young men want self-help that is rooted in intellectual credibility, or a reminder of the relationship of meaning and responsibility, is hardly something to condemn them or Peterson for. This probably should be a role of pastors and preachers, and in fact, that Jordan Peterson for a moment fulfilled a vacuum left a lot of men's lives by the failure of well-meaning but inept youth pastors, perhaps fathers. His self-help advice wasn't really Christian, but it was perfectly laudable, and it seemed anecdotally to help a lot of young men, and it did. And something happened in the era of Jordan Peterson that I think is hardly, it's hard to blame solely for him. He was both idolized and condemned in a way so extreme, and this is true, I thought he put it well, that it seemed absurd to anyone who could go through it with their ego intact. Whenever he met young men who would be thanking him for saving their lives, and interviewers would be asking why he wanted to spread hate speech, with little in between. Peterson had always seemed to have slightly forthright streak that bordered on angry, and while in his early interviews he remained composed, 2018-2019 went by, so he often seemed to become more tearful or angry in interviews, suggesting that these extremes took an unsurprising emotional toll. And then, of course, everybody wonders about what happened to him physically with the benzo withdrawal and all of that, and then Daily Wire. And then, now all the drama, Candace Owens, woke right, all of this stuff. And so now Jordan's basically, at least he knew which shoulder to look over in the old days, and now he sort of has to look over both shoulders. And since the Jubilee video, it's just basically been an internet dogpile on Jordan. Yet for all of that, Peterson is still capable of saying things that are interesting, and of hinting at conclusions many thinkers are nowhere near. He is, or was, at the very least, determinedly unique and interesting. And again, a lot of people that I talk to, the feed will still bring up a Jordan Peterson video. Will they watch it? Probably not. And then I'll wait and hear from people, and someone will say, oh, there's something in that video you should watch. So then I'll watch that video or part of that video. And then maybe I'll make a video about it. Maybe I won't. The reason no one would care if I wrote an article about someone like Wes Huff, now a popular evangelist, is because Huff is saying nothing that suggests any particular individual insight. And most of what he says is nothing you wouldn't have found in an apologetics bookshelf for the last 20 years. That's exactly right. And that doesn't take anything against Wes Huff. Wes Huff is doing wonderfully with it. And it just goes to show you he not only has solid answers and a decent enough reputation, sort of buoyed by Joe Rogan, but he's got a great demeanor, he's winsome, he's charismatic, he's charming. But, you know, when I listen to Wes Huff, I just like, yep. I'm glad he's saying it. Keep going. Keep doing what you're doing. Glad it's working. Glad it's helping. Glad people are finding it. But there's nothing necessarily terribly new in that to anybody who's sort of been around that for a while. I want him to keep doing it. I'm glad that there is someone right now who can do it as effectively and has the open doors that he has. But Peterson was doing something, again, it was enlivening. And I'm not ready to write Peterson off. I think he'll still potentially have stuff. Now, a lot of the stuff he said before. Part of that is a function of the size of his stage. When you get to a stage of a certain size, you sort of have to repeat because every time someone hears you, it's sort of a greatest hits type thing. And that's especially true on a tour. But I think a lot of it is, I don't know how many, a lot of the interesting guests that he has on his conversation podcast host channel are helping him in at least the area I'm interested in. Now, again, I mean, people are often saying in the notes, don't talk about Jordan Peterson, or more of this or less of that. And it's like, I appreciate the input. I'll take it in as data. But I'm a very selfish YouTuber. I make videos about what I feel like making a video about. I kind of turn on the camera and off we go. And that's the way it goes. So you've heard it before. It might not be just that. If you've heard it before, it might not just be that you don't agree with that, but you're unlikely to care because Huff is just reading established ground in apologetics and repeating it like a salesman. Again, that's a little dismissive. He's doing it well. Healthy societies need thinkers who churn the stagnant water. They wake us up to a kind of slumber. Jordan Peterson's a lightning rod. Jordan Peterson's a stirring stick. Now, again, I agree with Merck. Those early days, and I agree with Whitley in that. How are you gonna endure that? I'm not gonna blame him at all. I've not had to face that. There's plenty of things that I praise God I haven't had to face. You know, people want to get famous, and I'm old enough now to say, I doubt you really want that. And, you know, for my friends, John and Jonathan, they've gotten a little more famous, but John and Jonathan can go to the grocery store and they can go to the supermarket and maybe they'll be recognized, but their lives aren't interrupted. The degree of fame that they have has given them more opportunities and more open doors and more conversations. But again, I've always been cautious of those status ladders because the higher you go, there's a sucking that happens and you get pulled up that ladder and these hierarchies bind and blind And yeah, the trajectory of Peterson's career may have been an inevitability of his ego that couldn't say that's enough and had to pursue art conference culture savior status. And it may be the fault of those who expected him to be more than he was. Either way, the failure of Jordan Peterson is a failure of a culture, a failure of public intellectualism, a failure of new media that boasted a positive replacement for the legacy media and instead replaced it with a siloed professional talkers who tour podcasts in a stagnant, intellectually listless wasteland. Again, a little too dismissive, a little too cynical for my taste. Everything has trade-offs. I think it's an amazing thing that we can have access to so many interesting people, but hierarchies bind and blind, and the inevitable sucking, if the higher you get, as my friend Rick in the comment said, the Peter principle's at work, and you will go as high as your competence allows you. Now, it doesn't mean you can't grow new competence, because that's in fact what we're always doing. You climb a rung, there's a new challenge, you're going to have to adjust. And Jordan's a smart guy. He's certainly getting plenty of feedback on his Jubilee performance. And again, I made that video about, I think Michaela is right there with him. I think she's trying to save her father from the belly of the whale. And he's got a lot of good friends around him, and some of his good friends are friends of mine. Jonathan and John, to me, are two outstanding individuals, both of them. Jonathan and John. Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke. Love them both, and I trust them both. And so Jordan's got good friends, but again, these hierarchies bind and blind. I've known wealthy people, and it's a rare wealthy person, a rare super successful person that can really listen to input and make change. And the higher you go up any hierarchy at all, the more that's true. So we'll see what happens. I don't think he's going to go on the Jubilee podcast anywhere. Or maybe that helps him. Jordan had, I remember, again, somebody in my local meetup when I was running the Jordan Peterson meetups, someone said to me, Jordan just needs to keep getting in more fights. I said, why? I said, because every time he gets in a fight, he seems to come out of it ahead. May happen with the Jubilee thing. You don't know. History is so weird. The future is so unknown. There's so many interesting turns in this world, and as Martin Shaw and I were talking about, I don't count Jordan out. It's because lightning tends to strike him a lot. Now, it's hard on him, but I think, I think he does need a refresh. I think he does, I've talked a lot about ARC. For a while he was talking about doing Randos conversations. And, the comedians in the corner had their way with that. But, hey, I'll tell you, as a pastor, I'll tell you something as a pastor. You know what you live on as a pastor? You don't write people off. You don't write people off. While there's breath, there's hope. And you keep praying and you keep hoping. And if you know somebody in person to a degree, you figure out, what can I do to encourage? What can I do to help? What can I do to... And, in many cases, as a pastor and as a clinician, you're really careful with advice giving, because I don't know. I don't know what it's like to climb to the level that Jordan has. I don't know what it's like to make decisions there. What I do know is that what you usually try to do is try a bunch of different things. And you fail. Your failure rate might be 10 or 100 times more than your success rate. But, if you don't fall prey to cynicism, if you don't fall prey to despair, if you don't fall prey to other of the traps out there, if you keep plugging away at it, you'll probably find something that will work. And by I mean work, I don't necessarily mean make you rich and famous. He's already both of those things. But help you move towards the kinds of really good and important goals that you actually want to reach. And that's what you do. So when I turn on the camera, I never quite know what I'm going to do with the video. But I was just reading about AI slop, and it was like, felt a little conviction. It's like, am I making AI slop? I mean, that's my it's my own insecurities, my own insecurities to make a video. It's like, oh, is this a good video? Maybe it'll go in the membership section. Can't put this one in the membership section because I already put another video like this in the membership section. Can't. I'm a selfish YouTuber, but I'm not that selfish. So anyway, leave a comment. I know, and if you're, some of you will say, don't make any more videos about Jordan Peterson. Well, there's going to be more. Jordan's story isn't done. Stuff is going to happen. And we'll be watching, just like the Truman Show. So leave a comment.